Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, December 18th, 2024, and our friend Ray McGovern is with us. Welcome back, Ray.
Thank you, Nima.
Let's get started, Ray, with the assassination of an important Russian general in Russia. And right now, do you think that with the way that the Zelensky administration is behaving and just do you think that they're gonna do they have any sort of support from the coming administration in this type of behavior that they're committing right now?
Well, the Ukrainians wouldn't do this without encouragement from some of the U.S. government. The U.S. government's hopelessly divided. And so I imagine that the Ukrainians, having been trained and well schooled in these methods, terrorism is what we're talking about, of course, that there was some encouragement there. But I can't prove that. The Ukrainians are quite able to do these things themselves, as they've shown. They learned a lot from the Israelis, who do these things the best of all people, terrorism. So, what am I saying here? I'm saying that this is really important. Will it goad Putin into doing something that he didn't want to do before? No, that's my view. He sees this as this desperate act to try to maybe sow division between some elements of the Russian army and him. In other words, there have been reports, at least, none of them all that credible, in my view, that the Russian army is really chomping at the bit. Well, let us do more, unrestrain us. We could knock those Ukis out. Well, they could knock those Ukis out. That's not Putin's style. He's just chipping away. What do they call it? He's attrition, right? Attrition. And that's working famously for him. Matter of fact, they have Pokrovsk surrounded now. And it looks like just a matter of days rather than weeks that will fall, opening up the way all the way to the Dnieper River. So the big takeaway for me is that this is an indignity, the likes of which is not suffered very often, and it requires some sort of response. Do the Russians do tit for tat? Not lately, I mean, the Soviets did. I mean, you assassinate somebody, we assassinate somebody. This time, I think Putin will retaliate in his own way. And heretofore, that own way has been to juice up the attacks on Ukraine. This time, it's possible he may hit a decision-making center, as he has threatened to do before, because whether Budanov, the head of military intelligence in Ukraine, told Zelensky and the others what he was doing, it doesn't matter. Zelensky's supposed to be in charge here. So that, I think, is the worst that the Russians would do. They may not even do that. They have, 5 weeks now before a change in administration here. They would prefer to wait, in my view, and just to list this as one of the many indignities that they have suffered without responding in a way that they could, but they have restrained themselves as Trump comes in. That is, I think, their preferred posture.
Who's Trump in the whole situation right now, Ray? Do you think that Donald Trump would understand the experience coming from the other administrations before him? His own administration, his first term, we had Biden, Obama, all of them together. What would be the heritage of all those administrations for the new administration that going to be in power on January 20th?
Well, in Ukraine, this administration shows me, the new one coming in, that they have their heads screwed on right. Now, lots of caveats there. But the biggie was, of course, that Trump has personally castigated the firing of longer-range missiles into Russia proper hundreds of miles, he says. Well, the ATACMS have a range of 190 miles. That's as far as they can get, nowhere near Moscow, but they're doing it. And what has Trump called them? Foolish, foolish. Why are they doing this? He said, why are they doing this? Well, hello. This says many, many things to me. It says, for example, that Trump is not overburdened now by being called someone in Putin's pocket. Back 2016, 2017, his victory in that election was blamed on Vladimir Putin. It was Putin that put him in place. It was Russiagate. It was the Russia hacking. All of that's just been disproven now, and disproven in court documents, court testimony, all kinds of emails surfaced with respect to various judicial proceedings. And so I see Trump being much more confident now. Look, if they pull this stuff again, I'll just draw out all these documents. My good friend Kash Patel, whom I'm named to be FBI director, if he gets approved, if that nomination is confirmed, he knows where all the bodies are. He knows where all the data is. And although the shredders may be working full time, the paper shredders at the FBI headquarters, it's really hard to shred the hard drives and the other things that are available. So I think Trump is more confident than ever. And were he not more confident, he would have been afraid to say, whoa, this is foolish. Why are you? Because then people would say, oh, there he is. There he is defending Russia. So this confidence, I think, should augur well for his entering talks with Russia about Ukraine. It's going to be really sticky, okay? But as I've said before, I think on your program, there's leeway there. There are ways to get together and pick things that would be palatable to both sides, and a ceasefire. I've been appealing for a ceasefire over Christmas, for God's sake. Why couldn't, if they could have one of those in the trenches of World War I? My God, even if that was an unofficial one, why can't they have one now? Well, we'll see what happens, but I'm not getting much resonance on that. That's about all I want to say about, or well, it occurs to me right now on Trump, but he's got his work cut out for him. He's got to realize that what the Russians have said, they mean. That is, first and foremost, no Ukraine in NATO. They've been saying that since 2008 to our ambassador, as you know. That's the first precondition. The other is for a ceasefire, well, you have a demilitarized place there. Back in April of 2022, just 6 months after the special military operation, the invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces, they did reach an agreement. And Putin and Lavrov have both said that's the basis, okay? No Ukraine in NATO. A ceasefire, demilitarization. We'll handle Crimea and other sticky wickets in due course, in 50 years, okay? So there was the makings of a deal. As a matter of fact, that deal was initialed. We have the text of it. And those are the main provisions. Now, what Putin says now is, okay, he said this in June, addressing the foreign ministry. Okay, we'll go on basis on that, but now we have 4 oblasts. We have 4 provinces in Ukraine that are part of Russia now, for God's sake. We had plebiscites, and they voted to join Russia. That's not going to change. And we're going to clean out the rest of the territory in Donetsk that remains to be cleaned out. That's going to come in a couple of weeks, definitively, okay? Now, the other thing is that would like the sanctions lifted. Now, Putin said that, but Lavrov, talking to Tucker calls and says, well, how about the sanctions? You really want those things? And Lavrov says, sanctions, schmanctions. Yeah, they hurt us in the beginning, but we're pretty resilient, and we've found ways around them. Well, you know what autarky is, Tucker? Well, we have ways, together with our close allies, the Chinese, we have ways to. So the sanctions, they're hurting you guys more than they're hurting us. I mean, you guys in Western Europe. And so, yeah, sanctions we'd like them lifted. But so, in effect, he's saying that isn't a crucial point. So, if Trump wants to brag about getting something held tight, he could say, well, we didn't lift the sanctions, and that's not going to matter too much. What else? Well, of course, the Ukrainian forces need to evacuate all of the territory claimed as part of Russia now before even a ceasefire takes place, according to Putin. Now, is that going to be difficult? Well, they have some fortified places still in existence, but the Russians are attriting and attriting and attriting, and they're not going to last very long. So that's going to be one of the things that when Trump comes in will be negotiable. Let me refer to just one more thing, and that is at the end of October 2 years ago, when Putin was having one of these 3.5-hour Q&As after he's speaking for 25 minutes, answering questions off the cuff. Comparisons are invidious, but this is one bright guy and one circumspect guy. And I'll say it, Putin is a statesman, and we're lucky to have him there, okay? We're lucky to have somebody who can restrain the stronger forces in Russia that want to do to NATO what they did to the Nazis back in World War II now, okay? So, Putin is, where was I here? I forget exactly what point I was going to make.
You were talking about the conference that he had for more than 3 hours with the press.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, thanks. Yeah, it had to do with bargaining chips, okay? Thanks for reminding me. And what Putin, well, it was interesting. It looked like one of these canned questions, Everyone does that. So he calls at the very end, 3 hours and 15 minutes in, calls on a Serbian journalist. Sir, he says, Mr. President, I'm planning to have a vacation in Odessa. I'm told it's a beautiful place. I'm wondering, should I apply for a Ukrainian or for a Russian visa? Pretty damn clever, huh? So, this is October of 2022. Now, Putin rises to the occasion and he says, Odessa, what a beautiful city. It's degraded now with the Ukrainians, what they've done, but it's just a pearl, Yeah, by all means, you should go to Odessa. Odessa, it could be a Yabloko Razdora. Now, Yabloko is apple, okay? Razdor is discord, okay? Going back to the Trojan War, if you can look it up, and actually Google has it, okay? An apple of discord, okay, Odessa, or it could be a way of facilitating the kind of deal that could be made by reasonable people. So, whatever happens, it's really not our choice, but those are the choices. An apple of discord, or it could be used as a way of getting around these very thorny problems. Wow. Well, my guess is that most of the Russian analysts now working for U.S. intelligence or the State Department, they can't stay awake for the whole 3.5 hours, okay? So that's a benign interpretation as to how there's no evidence at all that President Biden was told about this not so subtle offer, deal on Odessa. Now, most of my colleagues say, that's crazy, Ray. Long since passed. There's no chance that the Russians are going to deal on Odessa. I don't think that's out of the question. I think it's still on the table. Now, why is that important? Because Odessa is vital to Ukraine. If there's going to be a rump Ukraine or whatever kind of Ukraine, they have to have an outlet to the sea. That's where the Dnieper, around where the Dnieper comes in, and it's on the Black Sea. So if Ukraine is going to be more than just a farm for the rest of Europe, and they have enough potential, industrial potential, to reconstitute themselves after several years, they need Odessa, okay? And does Russia need Odessa? Well, they'd like to have it, but I see the makings of a deal there still. Will Biden be advised about this? Not unless he's watching your program, Neiman. I understand he does watch from time to time. Joke, joke. But, this needs to get up and out, because there are sensible people trying to prepare Trump to deal on Ukraine. They need to know this. Kellogg, he said some strange things. General Kellogg, who's the principal envoy for Russia and Ukraine, he said some strange things, but he also has put out a plan that has flexibility in it and that meets some of Russia's requirements. Big one, of course, is no Ukraine in NATO. Now, my colleagues all say that's firm. This Kellogg plan, if memory serves, says no decision on Ukraine and NATO for 10 years. Well, my attitude is Trump does deals. He makes deals. So he'd say, Mr. Putin, how about 20 years? 20 years. And Putin would come back and say, how about 50 years? And Trump will say, 35 and we got a deal. I mean, it's not so complicated. What's going to happen in 35 years, I mean, this is just one example of how things that seem, incorrigible or just not able to be addressed at all can be by people who want to end the damn thing. And the last thing I'll say on that is simply that President Biden has said we have to stop the Russians in Ukraine, because they're going to take over all of Ukraine. Then they're going to take over Poland. Then they're going to take over the Baltic states. And my God, we just have to stop them here. Well, we still can, okay? Now, everyone with a sane head on their mind and knowing anything about Russian desires or Russian intentions here knows that that's poppycock, okay? Knows that the Russians have no intention of doing that. So here's an opportunity for Trump to say, what Biden said about the Russians going into Poland or even taking over all. I have talked to Vladimir Putin. He's a good friend of mine, and he said, all right, Trump, now that you're in here, I won't go into Poland. I won't go into the Baltic states. I don't even want all of Ukraine. Now, would that be easy for Putin to do? Oh, yeah, because the former was a big lie. All he wants is a security arrangement where he doesn't have NATO troops and NATO missiles facing him along the line there, battle lines in Ukraine. And that's easily done. Ukraine has lost. Trump is smart enough to know that. If Putin wanted to rub it in, if he wanted to have a definitive retreat, unconditional surrender, well, that would be one thing. He's too smart for that, okay? So there's, I'm a voice crying in the wilderness. But I'm convinced that with a measure of goodwill on both sides, it's possible. Now, last thing here, goodwill on both sides. Trump has to know that he's fighting uphill. He's sort of like the fellow in the circus who cleans up after the elephants, after everybody's gone home, he cleans up after, because Ukraine is a mess. Okay. So Trump has to realize that Ukraine is a mess, and that was by choice by his Democratic predecessors. He has to know that Obama, in his own wisdom back in 2014, 2015, said, look, balance of power 101. Okay. Look at the map, for God's sake. The worst thing we could do is to give the Ukrainians the idea that they could prevail against a much stronger Russia. And that's why we're not giving them offensive weapons now. Putin, Biden comes in. I say, no, I think we're the sole exceptional. We're an indispensable country. We can do what we want. And Blinken and Sullivan go them on into that. And you know what came of that, okay? In other words, Obama was right. I don't think Trump could ever bring himself to say Obama's right, but he could go back to 2015 and say, there was a time when we denied offensive weapons to Ukraine precisely for this reason. There is no contending with a country that has several times as many people, several times as much potential to build their weapons. And why we went in there was crazy. I said so at the time, says Trump, and I say so now. We've got to cut a deal. We've got to get this off the table. Now, so I think that's likely to happen before he's in there for more than 6 months. The problem I have with that is that would free him to do whatever he wants to do in the Middle East, or whatever these crazy people that in our U.S. Navy tell him to do against China in the Far East. But those are rivers we have to cross then. Let's get rid of Ukraine and stop the carnage. And when I say carnage, I'm saying that, talk about cynicism or hypocrisy. Tony Blinken, and even before Tony Blinken, Jacob Jeremiah Sullivan have been saying, look, we fulfilled our promise. We gave Ukraine everything needed, okay? We gave them weaponry you wouldn't believe, but they ran out of soldiers. They don't have any soldiers to man the weaponry. Okay? So, man, they can lose now unless they draft 18-year-olds and 19 and 20-year-olds. They got to do that now because that would save them. And look, they're reluctant to do that. So what could we do? We were with them for as long as it took, and now we're out of there. And this guy Trump is probably going to blow the whole thing together with these cowardly Ukrainians who don't want yet another cohort of young people to be destroyed. So it's a sour taste I have about all this, but you asked me whether it's better to have Trump dealing on Ukraine. Of course it is. Just look at the more recent history. And one thing, you may want to get into this later, but I'll just say that, I'm a current intelligence analyst, Now, my advantage is that I've been doing this for 50 years. So I know a little bit about the history going back to 50 years. But I didn't go for a PhD, just a master's. And I don't have professor or doctor in front of my name. But there are people who are now speaking sense. And one of the more recent fellows is a fellow named Gordon Hahn. Now, he's 15 years younger than me, so I wasn't very familiar with him. But another professor named Jeffrey Roberts, and you might consider these for your program, he's a UK professor at the University College Cork in Ireland. He wrote the book on Stalin, okay? So my point is simply, these are historians. They don't sit on this ivory tower. They apply all they've learned about Russian history and Soviet history to the case at hand. And this fellow Hahn, if you want to talk about it later, has written an incredible piece about the four horses of the apocalypse, which show that, number one, show in a nutshell why Trump is going to be in the position of that fellow cleaning up after the elephants in the circus, just as Putin, by the way, was in that same position, cleaning up after Yeltsin and the abuse that he took from the smart people in Wall Street and the Harvard boys who screwed up the Soviet or the Russian economy at that time. So cleanup acts are necessary. Putin has successfully done it. Can Trump come in? Only if he recognizes all the indignities, all the betrayals, let's say it, the betrayals The U.S. has lied on several key occasions, and we can talk about that later. I don't want to filibuster this.
Go ahead, Ray.
Okay.
By the way, I talked with Gordon Hahn and Jeffrey Roberts on this podcast. With
Oh,
both
you
of them.
did. Oh, you have already. Well, good.
Yeah.
Man, you cover the waterfront. You
But
can tell I'm from New York, right? I say waterfront. Okay. I'm going to have some coffee. Just a second. Okay. Gordon Hahn. Maybe you could put the link in the chat if or whatever you have here. But he publishes by himself. He's not part of some think tank. And I think he lives in California. He's American. And he's watched Russian history forever. Now, what he has done here is to say, look, there are 4 betrayals that Obama and Biden have done to the Russians. 4 tricks, 4 deceitful things that matter that Trump really needs to recognize as he's going in to clean up. Okay. Now, Gordon Hahn might have gone back, as we often have, Nima, to 1990, February 9th, Secretary of State. That's Gordon Hahn's, yes, the great Ukrainian ruin revisited. 4 horsemen of the Ukraine's ruin. So what I'm saying is that at least the first paragraph there, the Western strategy of NATO expansion to Ukraine at all costs has led to the second Ukrainian ruin. Now, before we get to the 4 ones he mentions, I just want to say that he didn't go all the way back to 1990 when we promised not to move NATO 1 inch, or if you prefer, 2.5 centimeters to the east of East Germany at the time. Okay, that promise was the first big betrayal. He doesn't even go back that far, even though he's a historian. He starts with the Maidan. Now, what happened in the Maidan? We know that that Victoria Nuland and the U.S. ambassador in Kiev, Jeffrey Pyatt, we know that they colluded in causing a coup on the Maidan, the main square in Kiev, Ukraine. Okay. Now, not only do we know that they were behind that, we know that from YouTube. I mean, it's the most extraordinary thing, Nima. Very briefly, on the 4th of February, 2014, YouTube played an intercepted conversation between the coup plotters, Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt, okay? And they were naming the people who are going to be the new government. And they were saying all kinds of things. One of them was, we may need an international personality to to glue this thing together. But Joe Biden, he said he could come in as an international personality, put his blessing on this thing. We just heard from Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, that he's good for that. All right. And then Nuland says, Pyatt says he's a diplomat, so he's worried about the EU. So he said, the EU's not going to, what about the EU? And Victoria Nuland says, F the EU. Now, I'm going to say the word, I don't want to give any, but there has 3 more letters on it. So why do I mention that? Because 2 days later, she apologized. She said, I didn't mean to F the EU. No, I slipped out and that. So you don't need any information about whether this is authentic or not. It was authentic. The 4th of February, 2014. So McGovern says, oh my God, this is amazing. That the whole thing has been blown. That's the intelligence term, right? I mean, you can't have a coup now when you have the guys, come on. Well, apparently, Putin's not in McGovern's pocket, but he had the same thought. He's in Sochi, Winter Olympics. He said, whew, wow, I'm glad that one's blown. They're not going to try that now with that up on YouTube. Well, McGovern and Putin were wrong. On the 22nd, they do the coup. Putin's still in Sochi. Now, one of the interesting facts here, of course, that most people don't know is that Joe Biden played a role in this coup. Why? He called Yanukovych, Ukrainian president, duly elected by an early election. He called him and said, "Look, don't worry about it. Everything's under control. I know there's a deal where you've told your police not to shoot at any of these demonstrators, these terrible demonstrators. So hold to that. Everything's going to be all right. I assure you, Joe Biden." Meanwhile, Barack Obama calls Putin with the same message. Let's get everything under control. And on the 21st, the day before the coup, the German and the French and the Polish, this guy Sikorsky, who's now still the Polish foreign minister, made promise, cross heart, hope to die. If you just tell the police not to shoot at anybody, everything's going to be fine. And there'll be early elections, and that's what you agree to. So everybody said, "Oh, this is great." Well, that wasn't great because the people fomenting the coup entered all the buildings. The shooters, also responsive to the masters of the coup, were shooting from tall buildings, shooting both the police and the demonstrators to show that this was a really bad thing, okay? So all that is going down on the 22nd of February, and Putin's looking at this and saying, right, everything's going to be all right. And they told Yanukovych that too, huh? I better get my rear end back to Moscow, which he does on the 23rd. And they meet, they talk about where their equities really are in Ukraine. Of course, Crimea was the main one, and you know the rest of that story. What's my point? Well, those Germans and those French and the Polish guy who was supposed to guarantee this New Deal lied. They must have known that the Nuland and Pyatt folks were going to come in big as soon as the police stopped shooting at them, which they did. Yanukovych had to run away. They had to be rescued by a Russian helicopter, I think. And so that's the way that thing went down. And Gordon Hahn explains that as the first horseman of the apocalypse, the first major betrayal that the Russians suffered at American hands. Now, what's the second? Well, the second one is Minsk. Now, you have to realize that after the coup in February of 2014, the Ukrainian army, such as it was, started to go east and to put down the people, the rebels in Donetsk and Lugansk, who didn't want to submit to the new coup regime, okay? But they didn't have much of an army, right? They were causing some havoc, but the people in Lugansk and Donetsk were fighting against them. At the end of that year, 2014, there was an agreement. We don't want to kill each other off, ceasefire, and what we're going to do here is we're going to change the Ukrainian constitution to allow for a degree of regional autonomy for Lugansk and Donetsk, and we to have a kind of ceasefire in place and work things out. Well, that was a deal, okay? Who guaranteed them? The same French and the same Germans, okay? And Poroshenko, a couple of people there from the Ukrainian leadership as well. So what happened? Well, that didn't do so well, so they did another agreement in Minsk early 2015, same terms, and did the thing hold? Not very well, okay? 14,000 Russian stock people, Russian speakers, were killed by artillery. Well, maybe not 14,000. That counts the 1,000 that got killed by the Lugansk people and the Donetsk people firing back. So let's say 13,000, okay? So that continued. And when Putin, by his own admission, and the people who criticize him for this say, well, he waited. He waited how many years? 7 years, okay, for them to take this seriously. And they didn't. There was no pressure on the Ukrainians to do what they agreed to do under guarantee from the French and the Germans. And worse still, just at about the time that the special military operation began, Angela Merkel, who was Chancellor of Germany at the time, bragged about the fact, oh yeah, Minsk. Oh, yeah. Minsk was a really convenient thing because it gave us time. I mean, the Ukrainian army was not much then. Now we've trained them up to NATO standards. We have NATO weaponry. Look at them now. So, we strung Putin along. And there was not going to be any enforcement of Minsk. I mean, they were a guarantor, right? Okay. And the French guy, Francois Hollande, the president of France at the time, said the same thing. Ha, 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 ha. Okay. Indignity number 2, or betrayal number 2. And Putin caught a lot of flack for that. And he has admitted, I shouldn't have trusted them because they never really wanted to make good on this. All they wanted to do was to train the Ukrainian army as it now. It became pretty much one of the strongest army in Europe. And by February 2022, when the special military operation began, they had been shelling Donetsk in particular and Lugansk in an uptick way. As a matter of fact, starting on the 10th of February, the volume of shelling of Lugansk and Donetsk went up 10 times as much. It was about 500, went up 10 times that. And am I making that up? No, those are OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, statistics, okay? Nonpartisan, people on the ground, monitors on the ground. The uptick was really big, starting on the 12th of February 2022. And of course, 10 days later, let's see, well, 2 weeks later, about the special operation started. So there's that one, indignity number 2, or as Gordon Khan aptly illustrates it, betrayal number 2. Now I'm going to skip to number 4.
Number 3 was the December 2021.
Yeah, that's my favorite. Okay, I'll do that now. Right.
Yeah. Okay, you want to leave it to the last one. No. Go ahead the way you want to do it. Yeah.
Well, no, I'll do it chronologically. You're right. It's just that I take a particular pleasure in this because I seem to be the only Western analyst that read the readout from a call that Biden had from Putin on December 30, 2021. Okay, so just before the special military operation. Okay, so thanks, Nima. What I saw in the readout was pretty simple. You're an analyst, you have to read these things, and it said, after this conversation, which Putin took the initiative, asked Biden, please, we need to talk, okay? And Biden said, my God, our negotiators, we agreed already. Our negotiators are meeting in Geneva in 12 days, for God's sake. And, why do we need to talk now? And Putin said, please, Mr. President, we need to talk. We can discuss why Putin felt this urgency later, but that's where it went down. Now, Biden, to his credit, said, okay, if you need to talk, when? He said, today. Oh, okay. Well, I'm in Delaware. That's okay. All right, fine. So he's home alone during Christmas. Americans will get that illusion, okay? There's a movie about that. He's not with Lincoln. He's not with Sullivan. So when Putin says, look, Mr. President, you can understand pressure from your own military. You get it all the time. I get it too. When I told our military on the 21st of December that you were going to put hypersonic missiles in Ukraine as soon as they were available to you, well, I caught all kinds of hell from them. I said at the time that would mean 5 minutes warning time rather than the 12 or whatever minutes we have now, if they're hypersonic. And I told these guys, the U.S. is eventually going to get hypersonic missiles. I don't know why there's this delay, but they'll get them. Okay, then they're going to put them in Ukraine. Putin's words on the 21st of December to all his 4 stars and the defense minister himself. Okay, so here's Putin saying, "Now, Mr. President, you already have these kinds of installations in Poland, and well, you have them in Romania, and you're almost finishing them up in Poland. Look, it would really help me with my military, and it would just make really good sense to abjure any intention to put what they call offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. Could you do that?" Now, okay, Home Alone. Biden says, "Well, what's wrong with that? We have them in Romania, going to have them in Poland." "Yeah, sure, okay, yeah, that's good." And so the readout says, the President of the United States said the U.S. has no intention to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. Okay, so that's the 30th of December. New Year's Eve, Ushakov, Putin's main man here, he says, "Oh my God, they're finally taking us seriously. This meets the majority, in some way, the majority of the 7 points in our treaty, for God's sake. So let's go." Okay, that was rejoicing. It was overt. This was a big break. Okay, so the 12th of January comes, and Wendy Sherman is leading this delegation to negotiate with Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister, in Geneva. And Ryabkov says, "Okay, Wendy, let's get down to brass tacks here. We'll figure out how we guarantee there are no offensive strike missiles in Ukraine." And Wendy Sherman says, "Huh? I don't know anything about that. I have no instructions about that." Well, word gets to Lavrov and Putin, and next thing you know, Lavrov is meeting with Tony Blinken in Geneva on the 21st of January. Now, this is 2022, right? 21st of January, 1 month before the special military operation. Okay, so Lavrov says, "Tony, about this undertaking by your president, codified in the readout from this meeting, your negotiators not going to talk about that?" And Blinken says, "Forget about it. Forget about it." The president was home. He was in Delaware. He was alone. We weren't with him. And so, hey, forget about it. That's not going to happen. We have every right to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. And we will if the Ukrainians ask us. Now, we might be able to discuss how many or talk about numbers, but no, forget about it. So that's the 21st of February. The next thing that happens, Putin goes up to Beijing to talk with Xi and explains all this and says, "Now, Comrade Xi, I know you don't like to violate the principles of Westphalia, but we're going to have to do precisely that. We just want to let you know." And Xi says, "Okay, well, not until after the Winter Olympics in Beijing, right?" And Putin, "Oh yeah." So Xi carves out a little exception for Putin, and later says, "Core interests prevail here. We recognize each situation based on its own merits." Okay, so that was big. Got Chinese support. What happens next? I mentioned 12th of February, uptick, tenfold uptick in shelling against Donetsk and Lugansk from the Ukrainian forces. And on the 22nd, you have the Soviet Russian forces going into Ukraine. So this is the other broken promise. I mean, no one had really pointed that out. I did, and I talked to Jeffrey Roberts about that. And I was just so gratified that not only Jeffrey, but Gordon Hahn included that as a key third, what do you call it? Third treachery or third deception of the Russians. Now, so that takes care of that one, but it was a big one. Okay, now on the fourth one was when the Ukrainians got scared of the Russian offensive, I mean, the whole deal, in my view, was for Putin to send 100,000, not any more, troops into Ukraine to threaten Kiev and to say, look, Zelensky, we mean business. You're not long for this world if you don't stop it. He stopped it. They went to negotiations first in Belarus and then in Istanbul, Turkey. All kinds of attestations to this. They reached a deal. No Ukraine in NATO. We have a demilitarized situation in Ukraine and Russia, apart from that, guaranteed by great powers, okay? Put off Crimea and more thorny issues till later. Ceasefire, it's all worked out. Initialed by this fellow named Arachamia, the chief Ukrainian negotiator, who later explained, yeah, we had it all worked out. Early April, and then on the 9th, I think, of April, in comes Boris Johnson and says, no deal, fight on. We won't give you any support. We won't support you for as long as it takes if you sign on to that deal, okay? That was the kibosh on it, okay? Now, why is that important? Well, I mean, it's very clear what happened. The Ukrainians got scared that the Russians might do more than just surround Kiev. Did the Russians stop? Yeah, they withdrew from Kiev. Were they repelled by Ukrainian forces? Well, there was some unexpected resistance that was pretty powerful, but they had no intention of going into Kiev if they could work out a deal, okay? Bottom line, they scared the hell out of Zelensky. He reached the deal, and then the U.S. and the U.K. came in and said, look, sotto voce, this isn't about you. It's about Russia, okay? We're going to get those Russians. We're going to embarrass them. We're going to inflict a strategic defeat on them. Now, we're going to pretend it's all about you, okay? Are you with us? And Zelensky foolishly says, okay, all right, if you promise that you'll support me for as long as it takes. Oh, swear to God, fingers crossed. Anyhow, that's how that went down. So what are the Russians saying now? Well, I was amazed that the Russians didn't show the text of that initial treaty for many, many months. They don't do a lot of that kind of stuff when they have documentary evidence. Sometimes, for some reason, I don't still understand after watching them for 50 years, they don't use all the ammunition at their disposal. But then it came out, and Arachamia, the chief negotiator for Ukraine, gave interviews to the Kiev Post and other Kiev magazines. Yeah, we had it all worked out. And then all of a sudden, Johnson came in. Now, there's no disputing that when you have the chief negotiator from, and he's not only a chief negotiator, he's a real close pal of Zelensky. Matter of fact, he heads up the Zelensky fraction in the Ukrainian parliament. So those are the four indignities. Now, this last one means something because, as I think I mentioned before, Putin has said, that's sort of the basis. We're willing to take up that same deal, but we have 4 more oblasts, 4 more provinces in Ukraine. They're part of Russia now. We're not going to give that up. Our main thing is no Ukraine in NATO, all Ukrainian forces out of the territory we claim, and then we could deal with things like how exactly to do that. Now, is Trump up to that? The whole point of this is I feel that unless he realizes these 4 betrayals, unless he realizes that he's got to be like this circus guy with this little broom and clean up this mess that he inherits, unless he can build some measure of trust with the Russians, which is long since dissipated, then he's not going to be able to do anything because Putin has the high cards. It'll become inevitably clear to Trump, hey, I can't do the kind of deal I like. Shall I do something less? And my guess is that he will do something less. He's already prepared the way by some of his public statements. And one of the things he'll do immediately is to cancel permission to use longer range missiles to strike inside Russia, and that will be a major plus if he wants to enter negotiations sometime soon.
Ray, do you think that as time goes by, I think right now in the mind of Russians, they're thinking that what can we expect from the Biden administration with Syria, Georgia, Romania, and this assassination? What else can come from Washington? Are they going to surprise us again?
Well, it's December now, and we're no longer talking about an October surprise, right? We're talking about a December surprise. Now, if I were in Putin's shoes, I would have my strategic forces as well as my other forces on high alert. Why? Because there is no predicting what Tony Sullivan and Antony Blinken, which comprise the collective Biden, okay, at these points, comprise them. Where they're calling the shots, what will they do before they leave? They've already persuaded Biden, against the advice of the U.S. military. Where is Austin in all this, Secretary Austin? Against the advice of the U.S. military to authorize these longer strikes. For what? And now they're accusing, the Ukrainians for not having the manpower to deal with these very sophisticated weapons. They've given, all the things that Biden at first said they wouldn't do because he didn't want World War III. Okay, so they give them Abrams tanks. They give them all kinds of shells, including the ones that disperse and kill all the people in a miles radius. They give them F-16s. Okay, whatever happened to the F-16s? They've given them permission to use these ATACMS and the Storm Shadow from UK and the Scalps from France into Russia, 199 miles. So, what else are they going to do? I mean, well, they look on the shelf and they have no weapons to suggest to Biden, and say, this is going to get really pretty sticky. Maybe we ought to think about one of those mini nukes, one of those small yield, low yield nuclear weapons, just to show the Russians we mean business and to stop them for a while before Trump comes in. Then we have the power to do that. And, it's a major step, but you have a long list of pardons in your mind. You might include us on that list just in case people say starting a nuclear war is not a good idea. Okay, would they do that? I wouldn't rule it out. I wouldn't rule out anything these guys might try to do. And so, are there indications? Well, there are. This fellow, what's his name? Buchanan, Admiral Buchanan, out at Stratcom, which used to be SAC in Omaha, is saying, these low-yield nuclear weapons, or just our whole arsenal of nuclear weapons, they're very much in play now, And our idea is that if we get involved in a nuclear exchange, we have to save enough so in the end we will prevail. In the end, with millions killed on both sides, we'll still have enough to kill the rest of them. My God, this reminds me of what John Kennedy said when he was briefed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And because Ellsberg demanded that they come up with figures that if there were a nuclear exchange, probably about 50 million Chinese as well as Russians would be killed. But we're only about 20, 30 million of us. And he left that meeting saying, and they call this civilization? This is crazy. So these people have been planning for this. This is one of the major planners of STRATCOM, our Strategic Forces Commander. So he makes this in a public statement about a month ago now. And the Russians are up in arms and say, my God, Even Lavrov, when he talked to Tucker Carlson, mentioned Admiral Buchanan by name. So I said, what is this stuff that you think you can fight a nuclear war and win? I thought that Khrushchev and Kennedy and even we, Putin and Biden, agreed on that. In January 2022, it was officially agreed on that no longer could a nuclear war be fought and no one could ever win. Okay, so that's my deal here. I think this is a very, very tentative, very dangerous time. And of course, the prospect of either a mistaken judgment, and here comes a Russian missile, okay, at NATO, or a false flag. And we have people very adept at false flags that could engender this kind of exchange, just so that we could kind of show the world and show the Ukrainians that we were with them for as long as it took. We warned the Russians. So would that happen? I think the guys are against it. But my God, as I said before, I don't rule it out. These people are very dangerous. And it doesn't matter what I think. I know that's what Lavrov thinks. And I know that Lavrov and Putin are like this, of course. Putin has no option other than to think that, because he's always got to look at the admirals and his own generals right behind him and say, my God, these guys are crazy. What are they likely to do in the next five weeks? And maybe get their names on the pardon list. Just as an aside here, when we talk about pardons, it's quite bizarre how Biden is pardoning everybody and his brother. I don't know if he's done his brother yet, but he will. The interesting thing is that when I think I've alluded to this, I brief President Biden, played by Robert Scher, every week, okay, presidential briefing. I used to do those things under Reagan, okay? And this time I said, at the end, now, President Biden, Scher, you mentioned pardons just now, so this is a little awkward. I don't know quite how to say this, but as I left the office of the Director of National Intelligence, where I would compile the President's daily brief, the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, took me aside and said, now, Ray, I don't know how to exactly say this, but it's very awkward. But if the subject of pardons comes up, please tell the President that I'm really sorry about saying that the Russians were running out of ammunition and that they couldn't create their own ammunition, and that Putin had already lost. And it was just, I don't know, it was wrong, and I'm sorry. And so if he's thinking about pardons, could you just mention my name as being on the list? And Bill Burns, I talked to Bill Burns about this. He feels just as badly as I, when he said that the futility, the ineptitude of the Russian military has been displayed for the whole world to see. When he said that a year and a half ago, he feels really sorry about that, because all he was trying to do is to make you feel better. He knew you would like that. And so we've been telling you what you want to hear. So think of, if you can, if it comes up, please add Bill Burns too. President Biden, Robert Scher says, terrible, inept, unconscionable, crass, which of course it was. So I was just playing this little role because it would not surprise me at all if Avril Haines and Bill Burns, who have been feeding Obama, were feeding Biden all this stuff about how we're going to win in Ukraine, even though Obama had said in 2015 we couldn't possibly do that. Would they want to be on the pardon list? Well, I suppose if I were they, I'd feel vulnerable enough to want to be on there, together with Blinken and Sullivan and a whole bunch of other people who would feel, and legitimately so, vulnerable to this new fellow who's coming in on the 20th of January, especially since the people he's bringing in with him, notably the new FBI director, knows chapter and verse, knows where the bodies are buried, and will probably not relent in going after people, if there are any, that have not yet been pardoned. Whoops, you're not on.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Just to wrap up this session, I know that you wanted to talk about the morality of whistleblowing. And
yeah, just briefly, there is a new whistleblower. Now, I don't know this for sure. He's just been accused of blowing the whistle. He's a CIA employee, and he was out in Phnom Penh in Cambodia. And he's accused of leaking those two documents that had to do with Israel's plan to start a war against Iran. Okay. Now, Daniel Ellsberg, who I'm pleased to be able to say was a really good friend of mine, had a lot of guts. He did the right thing, but he did it too late. And he was the first one to say, don't do what I did. Don't wait until the war already starts. Leak now. Okay. Face up to it. Take the risk. Just do it. Now, this apparently is what this fellow, what's his name here? Ahmed. He's a, as I say, CIA employer, Asif Rahman. Okay, so he is accused of copying or printing out these two really sensitive documents showing exactly how the Israelis plan to attack Iran, and making them available to a website or some channel, which got immediately incredible attention. And the U.S. government contends delayed, mind you, Israel's attack on Iran. Now, this is bizarre. Let's assume, I don't know if it's true, he has pleaded not guilty, but to keeping him in prison anyway, unlike the customary procedure where you keep track of them, you don't keep them in prison. So what's the government arguing? It's saying, my God, this delayed a war, okay? May have prevented a wider war. And there's this one of these prosecutors are really, lawyers, I come from a family of lawyers, but judge this one for yourself. The U.S. prosecutor, Troy Edwards, he said that the volatile nature of the developing situation in the Middle East made the leak especially dangerous. Why? He explained, quote, "It is hard to overstate what other circumstances present graver risks of danger to human life than unilaterally deciding to transmit information related to plans for kinetic military action between the two countries." Kinetic, that means violent, right? Okay. So it's hard to imagine anything more dangerous for the world than to divulge ahead of time plans for war. Huh? I think a human being would say, actually, if it prevented or even delayed plans for war or made them less likely, I mean, isn't that what would make the world less dangerous? So this is the folly that's included in here. We are watching this very closely. One of our VIPS members, Phil Giraldi, has an article that he's prepared. It'll appear on unz.com tomorrow or the next day. We don't want to say that we know what he did and why he did it, but as Ellsberg always said, what we need is people who will do this before it's too late. Okay, I didn't do that, says Ellsberg. Some people did. Elizabeth Gunn, one of the members of Sam Adams Associates for Integrity and Intelligence, she was in the UK, and she divulged NSA's messing with the Security Council before the war in Iraq. NSA and the British equivalent GCHQ, which she worked for. And just a word on that, she saw on her screen in January, okay, of 2003, okay, right before the attack on Iraq, she saw on her screen a message from the National Security Agency, okay, and it said, it was signed, Koza, the last name of this fellow, okay, and it said, we are expecting a vote on the Security Council on giving us permission to attack Iraq. It's going to be an uphill battle, and so we have to surge our efforts to collect all information, not only on the permanent members of the Security Council, but all those other members where we have leverage. We have to make sure that they make the right decision. We have to do it now, okay? And so Catherine Gunn looks at this and says, oh my God, not only are they going to do an illegal war, but they're trying to subvert the members of the security. She said, I have to do, she prints it out, right? Puts it in her blouse or whatever, and gives it to a friend who has a friend on the, I think it was the Observer in London. And the Observer does its homework, right? There was a really smart guy on the Observer. He had a secretary call up Frank Koza. Okay, that's the whole name. It's blown now, so I'm not violating any. Frank Koza. It's right on the bottom of that thing. Mr. Koza, I like Mr. Koza's office, please. Yes, okay. May I speak with Frank? Who's calling? The London Observer. There's no Frank here. And so he himself, this journalist, calls 5 hours later and says, give me Koza, give me Frank, please. I want to talk to him right away. Just a second. Frank Koza, thank you very much. This is the London Observer. We'd like to interview. Poof. It was easy as pie to verify this was the real deal. Now, the point is that got published on the front page of the Observer several weeks before the war. Did it have an effect? No. You know, the cards were stacked. What happened to Catherine Gunn? She knew quite well that she was liable for at least 2 years of prison. They went after her in court, and her very clever lawyer said, well, okay, you say this attack was legal. We say it was illegal. Let us see the documents in which your Attorney General in London justified this attack on Iraq. Perfect squelch. They were unwilling to provide those documents. They said, Miss Gunn, you walk free. So she did walk free. What's the point here? She warned in time. Did it work? No, but not to her discredit, to the discredit of, it just, the cards were stacked. Scott Ritter did very much the same thing in February of 2003. We've talked about that before, when he showed the debriefing showing that Saddam Hussein's son-in-law, Hussein Kamel, had said there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, okay? Newsweek had that, CNN had that 3 weeks before the war, and the CIA said, no, you can't publish that because that would prevent the war. So there are whistleblowers that do this kind of thing in time. Now, one reason I say all this is not to advertise these very, very courageous people, but to say that there are no doubt people of equal integrity and courage within our government now. So, referring back to what Blinken and Sullivan and the collective Biden might do in the next 5 weeks, whether it's a false flag attack or whether it's justifying some other dastardly act like using a mini nuke, for God's sake, I'll quote my friend Dan, don't do what I did. Don't wait until it's too late. Do what Ahmed did and listen or delayed that Israeli attack. An Israeli attack on Iran is the most likely thing to blow up in the next 5 weeks. Why? Because they're ready and they want to mousetrap Biden and then leave Trump to act as this circus cleaner-upper at cleaning up the droppings of the elephants. In this case, it would be the donkeys, but the cleanup is just as messy. So I'll conclude this segment on that. If people want to know more about this, our website for the Sam Adams honorees is quite simple. It's samadamsaward.ch. C as in Charlie, H as in hotel. We have more than 20 now, and many of them you will recognize those names. There are one or two others besides Catherine Gunn that did do this on time. None of them really succeeded, but we have to keep trying. So there's an open appeal to whistleblowers to do what it appears that Ahmed has done, and to do it on time before something really bad happens in the next 5 weeks. I am concerned, as perhaps you recognize.
Thank you so much, Ray, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
You're most welcome, Nima. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.